This is the Church Answers podcast. My name is Thom Rainer, and if you are listening to the bumpers, you see we have a new sponsor, Cheney & Associates, our favorite CPA firm for churches out in California. Love them. I've had a great relationship with them for years. Grateful that they've come in to be our new sponsor. I'm also excited about something else. One of my favorite people in ministry, one of my favorite denominational leaders, one of my just favorite people to talk to, Dr. Eddie Moody, who is Executive Director of the National Association of Free Will Baptists. Eddie, we have been together in a lot of settings, and to have you here for these 3 episodes of Church Answers podcast, as brief as they are, is going to be a lot of fun. So welcome, my friend.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate you having me on today, Mr. Thom. Thank you.
Mr. Thom. Your formality is way too much. You've probably listened to our other podcasts at times, Rainer on Leadership, and you know that
yes,
there is no formality between
no formality at all. I'm just trying to point out you are older than I am, but I'm going to let that go.
I'm older than most people are these days. And you know, I'll just say this because many of our listeners and our viewers know that I'm an Alabama fan, and this podcast has been recorded just a few days after the Saban announced his retirement. So I'm trying to deal with that new reality. It's a world that I haven't known in 17 years, but that's another topic at another time. So Eddie, you have put together and written the first aid kit. We're going to talk about it more in 2 more episodes from now. This is episode 136. We'll be talking about it in 138. But you're talking about something that is so vital for churches today, and that's helping the hurting. So just give me a little background about what made you decide to do this book, and we'll get more detail of it later.
All right. So I used to be a staff psychologist in correctional institutes.
I was hoping you would say that.
Yeah, back in the old days. And actually, I had a master's in clinical psychology. I worked in that way to, work on a PhD in counselor education. So I got all these questions from churches and Christians. What do I do to help this person that's going through grief? Or I've got a friend or family member that's depressed. And that's really what led me to go in this particular direction to write this book, to try to equip regular Christians, if you will, not just pastors, but it's good for pastors too. What can they do to help somebody that's depressed, going through grief or anxious? And really, Thom, that's where it all started way back when in that correctional institute.
I don't know if there's a book or anything out there. If it is, I don't know about it, that goes through in a very practical way, help someone deal with grief, help someone deal with depression. And you're right, Eddie. How many people, this is rhetorical, of course, but how many church members, how many people come up to us and say, my husband's going through depression, or my son is struggling in this area, or I've got a friend who, and sometimes we try to think of different resources to give them. This one is just kind of the handbook for succinct ways to begin to move in this direction. So I love what you're doing. You started talking about some of the things that are out there and why we must be concerned about the hurting. You mentioned depression. You mentioned, well, I'm going to let you go through and just talk about some of the areas that you cover.
So one thing, remember, we want our folks to remember 17.8% of the population is believed to struggle with depression. That's the highest it's ever been. So we've got to be aware of that. We've got to kind of watch for that and look for what we can do to help someone that's depressed. Another terrible statistic is that it looks like on an average day in the United States, 132 people take their lives. And so that's not always, believe it or not, always depression. It's sometimes just hopelessness or stuck. So we want individual Christians kind of be like the Good Samaritan. They've got compassion. They see friends, they see family members, coworkers, classmates in trouble, even people in their congregation. So to be able to look and to see, okay, this person's depressed, be able to think about things, which we talk about in the book. What can you do to help that particular person? And then to figure out what they can do to help somebody that is really in danger, of hurting themselves. And we even talk about what to do after a suicide. So, Thom, that's the big one we hit a lot. We also hit grief because everybody goes through that. And so we want our congregations to be really equipped at what do I do after someone loses a child in an accident? Or what do I do when someone has a husband who has dementia? And so we kind of coach them through what's complicated grief, what kinds of things to look for when someone's not making progress as they should. What can you do as an individual to help someone? Like remember the anniversary of the loss of
Oh,
their
yeah.
child, uh, going with them, listening to them and so forth. And so it's really critical for us to be the hands and feet of Christ, to not just be compassionate, but also have the capacity or the ability to help people in the worst moments of their lives.
We're talking to Dr. Eddie Moody, the executive director of the National Association of Free Will Baptists. And I knew your story about being among those who are in prison and being among those who have those issues. But now you have a connection with churches within your denomination for sure. But beyond that, and I'll say this about Thom Rainer. I was in seminary 3 years from a master's and a similar amount from a doctorate, and I never had a pastoral care or pastoral counseling course.
Mm.
So it was an option. I
Mm-hmm.
could have taken it, but I didn't, and I would not. Coming fresh out of seminary, I would not have had a clue what to do, and quite frankly, even being a pastor, I felt lost at times
Yeah.
trying to help some people. So this is for pastors, but it's also for pastors to help their church members as well, as I understand it.
And so, Thom, we're trying to really break it down a little bit. Like it's there in the scripture. A good example are Job's friends. And so we're trying to help pastors and lay people just think, I just need to be there, and people tend to say, well, what's the right thing I need to say? And we push against that. And we say, don't, you get into trouble when you start talking, which is what Job's friends did. They tried to fix Job. So we try to train people through the book to kind of think about, what's this person going through right now? What kinds of things do they need? And how can I meet a particular need? Kind of like Matthew 25, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so we look for specific things. As a pastor, we're also trying to train our congregation that way. And I can think of a particular event where we had a drowning in our community. And the first thing that I was called to it, kind of a rural setting, I remember we had 8 people from our church at the pond before the ambulance went away.
Wow.
I also remember that, they did not pronounce the child dead until they got to the hospital. But there's a guy that no one would ever think as a touchy-feely type or a counseling type. And he was just doing practical things. It was a complicated situation. So the body goes to the morgue and the husband is out of town and has to fly in. So he just went,
Wow.
purchased a Hampton Inn hotel room and brought it to the mom and said, here's the key. You go stay there as long as you need, because she wouldn't want to go back to the house, which he figured that out. But also he knew she would want to come back and meet her husband at the hospital. And so this is a guy who didn't think about what to say. He just thought about, what do I need to do? He was present and he thought of a specific act. And that's kind of what we want to prepare our folks for with the tragic situations that happen, to meet the needs of people there in their community.
Oh man, there's so many paths we can go. I'm gonna let you do one thing, and then, by the way, we got Dr. Eddie Moody on for 3 episodes, and we're dropping them all today. So as you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, just a reminder that listen or watch all 3, because we're going to hit different parts in all of this. Before we finish up this first one, Eddie, I'm going to give you an example of something that really happened to me yesterday.
Okay.
So I got a call from a pastor. And the pastor said, my adult son is going through deep depression. And he even has some thoughts that are not right. And I am at a loss on what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Why he called Thom Rainer, I don't know. I should have said, let me refer you to Dr. Eddie Moody, Executive Director of the National Association of Free Will Baptists. But he did. Talk to
Yes.
Thom Rainer as this middle person in all of this.
Yes.
What's a good thing for me to say?
Well, 1, just listen to them. 2, you're kind of letting them know this is A-okay. 17.8% of the entire population is going through what he's going through.
Wow.
Now, what I try to do is quickly, I listen to them. I try to kind of validate them, if you will. And then let them know. I encourage you to let the first thing you do, go see your regular primary care physician. So we want them to go see their physician. Sometimes, like right now, we've got a weather situation. Some people are, there's something called seasonal affective disorder, but with all depression, it just makes things much worse. So the first thing I want to do is just get a primary care uh, practitioner and just get them to see that person. Is there something physical going on? And also, I'm a little bit safe if they are suicidal, because they know what to do and they can deal with that immediately. One of the things we run into, or I've run into a lot of time, is, well, I shouldn't take medication, or I don't want to, take something that's going to impact my brain. And not that
Mhm.
that Mountain Dew or that chocolate or any of that other business doesn't impact your brain.
Right.
Uh, and so part of what we try to do is educate people about the whole process of depression. Elijah's our man. He's as depressed as he can be. And the first thing the Lord does is address the physical. Get up at the same time, probably go to bed at the same time, but eat these cakes, drink this water. So we want to start out with some sort of primary care physician, nurse practitioner, and just get them to look at them, evaluate them. Is there something physical going on? And then a lot of people that have a genetic predisposition toward depression, a good old, SSRI works for them, which is not any kind of high powered medication, but just getting them into that. And then we look and we see is counseling, and it usually is something that would be helpful too. But my first step is usually get them to a primary care practitioner to help out with that.
Well,
Does that make
listener,
sense?
viewer, it makes sense. If you're like me, you want more. These things are really, really brief. The primary reason they're brief is I'm not smart and I cannot think of anything for too long a time. But when we have guests like Dr. Eddie Moody, I want to hear more. You're going to hear more. You're going to see more. So stay tuned as well for another edition of the Church Answers podcast. We're going to talk about some of these needs in the community and where we are and how the church can respond to that. Once again, remember that his book is called The First Aid Kit for Churches. You can see the link. You can get all the information in the show notes. It's an incredible resource, and all of you need to get it. Once again, thank you, Cheney and Associates. Thank you, my friend Steve Cheney in California, and thank you for being the great sponsor of this episode and the rest of 2024. It'll be exciting to have you. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Church Answers podcast.